Hey, I'm Nathan Drake. If you're the adventurous type like me, then get in on the Subway Taste for Adventure for a chance to win epic trips and exclusive access to Uncharted 3. Get your code on 30-ounce drinks today. Subway, where winners eat. Ow.
That was a Subway ad for Naughty Dog's Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception, which first released in the PlayStation 3 back in 2011. Now, the previous video started with a semi-cinematic note to get us into the serious video game analysis. However, I couldn't help myself with that commercial. It is freaking hysterical. It reads like a corny YouTube ad read. Not that I would know anything about that. Uncharted 3 is a weird game for me. The last two videos have gone in depth on the fact the Uncharted series is a special place in my heart, having played the trilogy for the first time 10 years ago, never having played anything like it before. Kinda crazy to think that at the time, Uncharted 3 was the most recently released Naughty Dog title too. But the thing is, as the years have rolled by, Uncharted 3 was a weird one because I barely remembered it. Truly, I cannot recall any memories of my first time playing this game other than completing it. Well, I remember one thing. Every weekend in 2013, I would walk over to the game store to check out some new game, and when it was time for me to pick up Uncharted 3, the guy at the store felt like being a complete dick and wouldn't sell me the game because it was rated T for teen and I was only 12 years old, despite having sold me Uncharted 1 and 2 the previous week. I had to get my dad in there to sort the matter out. But my point is, between that memory and beating the game, my mind is a total blank. All I remember is that I liked it, but I enjoyed 1 and 2 more. I did play it a second time in 2013, but that was when I decided I just didn't like the game that much at all and felt like 1 and 2 were much more enjoyable to replay. But again, I couldn't tell you why I felt like that because I don't remember what about the campaign I might not have liked besides the fact that the funny cheats and unlockables weren't in it. Today, the last time I played Uncharted 3 was 2016, where I thought it was better than I remembered, but nothing about that playthrough gave me expectations for this one because once more, I don't remember that much about it other than doing it. I guess it was cemented in my mind as Uncharted, the next one. Not being as impressive as Drake's Fortune or Among Thieves, but that was years ago. I'm always open to giving a game another chance. Plus, it's easy to see how Uncharted 3 had to have been a difficult project to work on. The game had the task of following up one of the biggest, most highly rated games of the 2000s, Uncharted 2. That game was such a critical and financial darling that doing a sequel to it automatically adds pressure that wasn't there before. Uncharted 2 was able to look at what 1 had succeeded and failed at and made a great sequel. I've said it a million times. Third entries in games tend to exist in a wide spectrum, from they really outdid themselves this time to, well, some things did best, others not as much, creating a never-ending debate as to which game is the best, to, yeah, they really crumbled beneath the weight of expectation and ambitions not properly fleshed out. Uncharted 2 is the kind of game where even the people making it had a feeling they were doing something great, when normally it seems game devs are a bit nervous for a game's release, knowing all of its various faults. Two developers at ND reflected in 2009 that this might be the best game they ever work on. So, when the audience feels the same way, all eyes are on the third one to provide that same experience. But can you catch lightning in a bottle twice? Well, they were gonna try. The hype behind this game was massive. I already showed the Subway ad at the beginning, but there were other promotions of that nature, from sweepstakes to an ad of Harrison Ford playing the game. Uncharted 3 was the first time I ever had an interest in trying the series since the game launched and received a perfect 10 from IGN, which did admittedly pique my curiosity, but I was plenty occupied with Sonic Generations, which actually launched the same day as Uncharted 3. I didn't end up actually trying it until a year and a half later in 2013. I don't think this is my original copy of it though. I mean, this is clearly the 2011 artwork, but if you open the game up, it's the Game of the Year edition disc. I know I got the game at GameStop in 2013 because I just told that story a few moments ago, but I also said last time that my original PS3 fat model got the yellow light of death in 2013, and that's when we replaced it with the Super Slim model. The PS3 Super Slim was a late-stage revision that dropped in 2012, because a lot of consoles will just release a cheap alternative later in the lifespan for those who haven't bought it yet. I bring it up because of the fact that Uncharted 3 Game of the Year Edition was a pack-in title for the Super Slim, and because I like bringing up the nostalgia in these videos. I've had this PS3 for almost 10 years now, and it is quite beat up. I mean, the disc reader won't even read new discs. Like, I can play the same games I've been playing for years on it, but if I put a new disc in I just bought from the store today in there, it won't read the disc. The side panel also came off years ago. Like, you're supposed to open up the side panel to get into the hard drive here, but mine came off, I lost it, and I never found a replacement for it. I'm pretty confident this thing doesn't even read Blu-ray movies anymore. Like I said, it clearly shows sign of having been used quite a lot. Despite the fact that the PS3 will probably always remain Sony's least popular home console, I have a lot of great memories with it, and it's probably the PlayStation console I put the most amount of time into. But all that is besides the point. Uncharted 3 released to critical acclaim and financial success, but it just doesn't get talked about as much as the other games in the series, particularly 2 and 4. Is there a concrete reason why? Well, let's find out by discussing Uncharted 3: Drake's Deception. I was actually able to play the title screen from the PS4 version of the game this time because the menu plays the Uncharted 3 theme for all 3 games when originally the theme was changed for each game. Was always bugged by that in the PS4 port. So I showed the PS3 title screens in the previous 2 games. But that's me talking about tangents again. Uncharted 3 begins with Nate and Sully walking into a bar for a deal with this guy called Talbot. He and his client, Marlowe, want Drake's ring that Nate has. But the deal goes south when the money is fake. Nate and Sully have to go on a journey across the globe in competition with Marlowe and Talbot to find the lost city of Ubar. Francis Drake was sent to find it by Queen Elizabeth, but whatever he found made him erase all evidence of the voyage and lie to the Queen about having found nothing. That's definitely the Cliff Notes version of Uncharted 3 because a lot of stuff happens in this game with a plethora of characters old and new, but once more I'm trying to get us into the context of the story right up front so I can discuss the gameplay mechanics, as Uncharted 3 made a good impression right from the start with this opening action scene. It's hard to compare to the opening of Uncharted 2 since it was so iconic and action-packed, and I'm actually glad they didn't even try to get crazier with this opening, instead doing something different that's also cool, a straight-up bar fight to get players into the hand-to-hand combat, which is the best the series has seen up to this point. It still pretty much consists of pressing square over and over again, but they did a lot of work to make it fun and satisfying. The principles from Uncharted 2 still remain with attacks and counterattacks, but they made it feel more immersive and cool in that if Nate is near an object in the environment, he'll hit the enemy with that, such as a glass bottle or the top of a toilet bowl. Plus, multiple enemies will attack Nate at once, so you'll be punching the one guy, but then another guy will take a swing at you. You need to press triangle to dodge and attack them. You press circle to grab enemies and push them around. I've said it when talking about Uncharted 2 and I'll say it again for 3. It seems small, but hand-to-hand combat was a consistent go-to in Uncharted 3 because I thought it was a lot of fun to do, and just felt like I was playing a cool action movie, exactly what Uncharted is supposed to be. Helped by the sound design being punchy and visceral and the animations looking realistic and also being in great supply. I said that about Uncharted 2, but then 3 really brings the A-game with combat animations. Nate has a variety of counterattack animations or other unique finishers, like taking the pin from the guy's grenade and kicking him away, or using the butt of his rifle to smack a guy in the face, or stealing somebody's gun from mid-air when they're knocked out, or when Nate will toss his gun to the enemy like catch and then punch him in the face. The production values on Uncharted 3 are through the roof. Combat animations look fantastic, but the character movement is equally polished. I love how Nate won't just quick turn like he's a Resident Evil character, but will back up before turning. He just moves like a human being while not breaking the immersion in terms of how it plays or controls. The visuals are stunning in this game, taking the player all over the world and seeing different biomes and lighting conditions, and it all looks fantastic. The water of Uncharted 1 was plenty impressive, as was the snow of Uncharted 2. The way Nate's clothes would be covered in them if he rolled around in the water or the snow, for example, was great. But Uncharted 3 just tops that with really impressive lifelike sand as you leave footprints behind and you see the sand blow in the wind. Comparing this to the kind of sand Naughty Dog was able to pull off on the PS2 with Jak 3 7 years earlier is just night and day. But I don't need to compare Uncharted 3 to a PS2 game to make it look good. It's amazing how much Naughty Dog had evolved in their technology with the PS3 throughout the generation. Uncharted 1 looks so basic compared to its sequels. Nate's face looks different in each game, and you'd think each one of them was a new console or something. The first game saw him and all the other characters looking like wax figures more than people, but Uncharted 2 just knocked it out of the park in terms of the detail, but then Uncharted 3, by the standards of 2011, is about as lifelike as a game character could be. Uncharted 2 and 3 also have the occasional real-time cutscene in the midst of gameplay, as opposed to the 100% pre-rendered series of cutscenes like Uncharted 1. Not much to say about that, but I forgot to mention that improvement in the Uncharted 2 video. Well, actually, I don't know if it counts as an improvement since they obviously don't look as good, but still. It's not just the hand-to-hand combat I thought was improved in this. The shooting is also refined to perfection in Uncharted 3. Among Thieves made a lot of improvements to how levels were structured and how the aiming worked, but Drake's Deception continues that with weapons that are supremely cathartic to use against a horde of diverse enemies. Uncharted 2 introduced some different enemy classes, but 3 does that again with armored enemies returning, but having the strategy adjusted to where you can still punch them, but they take less damage if you don't break the armor with bullets or grenades. Or these big guys that somehow are stronger than the dudes wearing armor that can do massive damage with just one kick. The arenas continue to incorporate platforming and light stealth mechanics, keeping the gameplay diverse throughout and tossing fun new mechanics in, like how if a grenade is tossed at Nate, the player is given a specific window of time to press a button to toss it back at the enemies. Uncharted 3 is just bursting at the seams with ideas that reinforce the central concept of Uncharted, a fully playable action-adventure movie. The puzzle solving, to my surprise, was also greatly improved. I had mentioned in Uncharted 1 that I remember having to look up some of the solutions in Uncharted 3 when I first played it, but the puzzles being so easy in 1 had me thinking I must have sucked at it. Now, I don't know what qualifies as a difficult puzzle, as Uncharted 3's roster isn't going to keep you stuck on it for hours or anything crazy like that, but you had to think in this one the most of the entire trilogy. Mainly this table puzzle in the underground cavern when they go to France. The notebook doesn't give you a solution, you get 2 hints, and then you have to look at these floor panels and connect them with what's on the board. I kept getting disoriented until I took a picture of the board and then tried to assess what pictures went where when looking at the floor panels. It took me a few minutes, but I didn't look it up, so I was satisfied upon having completed it. Many are still simplistic, but I think enough puzzles in this game make you think or look around a little, which makes it a fine break from the action. In the first half of the game, I was very impressed with Uncharted 3, and surprised too. As stated before, I forgot almost everything about this game before doing the video, but during the first half of Uncharted 3, I was really glad to see that it was doing everything right. It had an exciting opening, an interesting premise, immersive visuals, good pacing between its puzzles, platforming and combat, and over-the-top action scenes. Everything I wanted from Uncharted was what I was getting from Uncharted 3, done in a way that demonstrated how much mastery Naughty Dog had with the craft after just 3 games. It was by the halfway mark where I realized, yeah, maybe Uncharted 3 is better than 2. I just never thought I'd come out of this game thinking that. All that was left for me to see was how the back half of the game played out. Here is where I think Uncharted 3 shows some cracks in the armor. Uncharted 2 was famous for its action scenes, the train, the gunship, the building, the convoy, all that good stuff. I'd imagine the pressure was on to do the same thing but make it even more depth-defying. So this game houses everything from escaping a burning building that gradually is falling apart while you run through it, a great scene by the way, catching a plane as it's about to take off, fleeing an ocean liner as it's sinking, and chase scenes across rooftops and streets. And of course the plane exploding and falling out of the sky that the game was marketed around. The game is jam-packed with action set pieces from start to finish, but sometimes it feels like action scenes for the sake of themselves. I suppose you could say that about a plethora of action games, but to expand on what I mean, I want to play this clip from an old behind-the-scenes video from Uncharted 3.
After our brainstorming meetings, we know that there's some things. We can go off and start pushing the technology in the direction that we know we might go. But yeah, the storyline, which characters, what they will do, that's all up in the air, and it really comes late in the project.
And then you have vice versa. If you have a really cool bit of gameplay that doesn't make any sense in the story at all, you have to figure, okay, what can we do? Can we add characters in? Can we take characters out? Can we move them around? For instance, there's a chase scene in Yemen in Uncharted 3 where we're chasing a guy through a level. We had no idea who that guy was. For I'd say about 1.25 years, but we had the level, we made it. We didn't know who he was gonna be, and then finally the story caught up, and then boom, we know who that is now.
I think what he said there would go for a lot of games, including Uncharted 2 perhaps, and that game studios are all doing their individual work and that's independent from what another branch is doing. Perhaps the who, what, where, and when of the train scene wasn't figured out when they started working on the mechanics of it on Uncharted 2, but Uncharted 3 just makes that feel more noticeable in that it's got action scenes like the Talbot chase halfway through that come out of nowhere, and it doesn't feel in character for a villain that can disappear from corners to then be fleeing from Nate through the streets. And when it ends, you just feel like it was filler, as you get knocked out and sent to another filler level. All I mean to say is that it definitely shows that Uncharted 3 had certain things the developers liked and wanted to see, and then sometimes the story would have to write itself around those things. The main difference with Uncharted 2 is that the story felt more cohesive, and the action that came with it felt a lot more natural. Perhaps it's because Uncharted 3 switches locations more than Uncharted 2. It's hard to nail down the exact reason beyond the fact that Uncharted 2 just felt more smooth in how the story played out, which is a subjective statement to begin with. As I've said before, I'm guessing Uncharted 3 was a really challenging project for the team. At the top of the video, I went into the fact that internally and externally there would be a lot of pressure to deliver a great game since Uncharted 2 was such a smash hit. That creates a problem of expectations, as you could never reach the same level of excitement in the audience now that people have seen it before. But then there was another challenge for the studio thanks to the way they managed this one. After Among Thieves, Naughty Dog had split into 2 teams, one of which was tasked with developing Uncharted 3. The other one was to do a different game, which started as Jak 4, a game that got as far as having a bunch of interesting looking concept art, but when the team was not passionate about it, they scrapped it and started a new IP, which became one of the greatest games of all time, in my humble opinion, The Last of Us, which was also a PS3 release. Meaning this split in the team wasn't as challenging as when they tried splitting up back when Uncharted 1 was being worked on, but still I'd imagine it created a lot of difficulty. Something I remember being a thing that showed in the final product, but as I have gone over throughout this video, I don't think my thoughts on this game from years ago were fair. I feel like Uncharted 3's narrative pacing and action interconnectivity was significantly better than I remembered. That chase scene was a big outlier, because for the most part, I was following along just fine. Uncharted 3 just has an interesting premise, because you want to see this lost city the heroes and villains are fighting over, but then you want to know what was so bad that Francis Drake had covered up the evidence of the discovery. And in addition to that, the game has a lot of entertaining dialogue and character interactions from the major and minor heroes and villains alike.
We've been trying to reach you for over 24 hours.
Oh, right, I need to top up my minutes.
You're using a prepaid phone?
Mate, those contracts are a complete rip-off.
What? Mine's broken.
Again? Shotguns?
Why not?
What the?
What? He only had 2.
You insult me.
You're a pirate.
And a good businessman.
The biggest thing I don't like about the story of Uncharted 3 is that it's very bloated. The first 2 games had a smaller amount of characters and plot lines, and I think they were better for it. Uncharted 3 just ends up juggling too many elements, like how half the game is spent with Nate and Sully working with Chloe and a new character, Charlie Cutter. The latter of which was a character that they made pretty likable as an ally to Nate with his witty lines and his claustrophobia that's used to set up this fight scene between him and Nate when he's been drugged by Talbot, but you don't know much about him, nor does he really need to be in the story as he's written out halfway through after taking a fall and breaking his leg. Chloe just doesn't need to be in this story at all. Her inclusion feels like it was done because she was so well liked in the second game and it would feel weird to not include her, but ultimately she just shows up to support the current mission and then tells Nate the job doesn't seem worth it and then quits after Cutter's injury. The main thing this game is trying to build an arc around was that Nate has taken this job way too far when the stakes are so high, and the back half of the game shows the consequences of that. Which I get, but I don't really feel like the early game did much to establish what makes this particular job so much worse than the other one they've done in the previous games, which were just as ludicrously dangerous. Elena's back in this one, and they build a plotline about how Nate proposed to her between games, but the wedding fell through thanks to Drake's always wanting to find more treasure. However, the story just brings that up when Elena appears.
Come on, admit it. You love all this as much as I do.
No. No, not anymore.
But then she's quick to jump back into the action when it means rescuing Sully later. Nate also feels that way, by the end realizing that the thrill-seeking isn't worth it over the connections he does have. That angle is new, but then I feel like the first 2 games already had these lowest point segments where Nate continues for the sake of the world over the thrill of treasure and exploration. So my point is that throughout the first half of the game, I wasn't really buying into the whole angle of this mission being more dangerous than the other one. It wasn't until Nate had to walk through the desert for days that I was really sold on the consequences of his actions. The peak of this game's narrative bloat comes at around the 60% mark where Nate is captured by Marlowe and Talbot and then given to these pirates to be killed off, but Nate escapes and has to make it back to shore. This is a well-constructed level in terms of pacing and combat, the player getting to toy around with water as a part of the stealth system, which is cool and all, but it feels so shoehorned in. It's an hour of the game where you're taken to a place far away from the rest of the story with completely new antagonists to deal with, only slightly justified by Nate getting tricked into thinking Sully's on board, so you try to rescue him before you learn it was a trick. By the end, I just feel exhausted with it since it feels like padding more than any other segment of the series thus far. Padding is a word with a negative connotation though. It's more like they came up with this idea of Nate getting captured by pirates and having to escape, but then had to justify it within the story of Uncharted 3, so you get a complete detour from the main plot that directly follows the most out-of-place chase scene in the series. Once it's over, you can then return to the story as though it didn't happen. The game would just feel better paced if this level wasn't in it, even if, in a vacuum, I thought it was a good level in terms of atmosphere and level design. Though I do really like the idea of Nate desperately wanting to rescue Sully, but that justification for the pirate section is a little weak since the thing that follows is Nate trying to get on the plane and walking through the desert once he learns where Sully actually is, which achieves the same goal just fine. But to return to the overarching narrative, I have to give Uncharted 3 a lot of credit here for how it told the story of Nate and Sully. The game showed how a younger Sully met and took in a 15-year-old Nate, solidifying that their bond is of a father and son, not merely guys that work together stealing treasure. People liked Nate and Sully before. The whole cast became instantly iconic. When you look back at the first 2 games, it's interesting to note how all of that comes from the funny dialogue and high-stakes situations, since the characters themselves never had much dimension on their own. So Uncharted 3 deserves props for showing the audience how much these 2 care about each other as a found family. The scene where Nate gets out of the crashed plane and walks through the desert hits pretty hard as Nate is in one of his worst positions, but he keeps going because he wants to save Sully, who he realizes is only captured by Marlowe and Talbot because of his obsession with the mission. If you asked me before this video, I would have told you that The Last of Us was when Naughty Dog started making their games more about the people and their relationships with others on a deeper level, but no, I think Uncharted 3 deserves a lot of praise for that too. Well, I guess Jack 3 deserves some props there too. I thought the Jack and Damus connection was the best material in the game, but I'm getting off topic. I thought that narrative throughline in Uncharted 3 was compelling enough to say this story was interesting from start to finish, even if some elements weren't as tightly written as Uncharted 2, which basically boils down to the villains. I liked Marlowe and Talbot more than I thought I would in this playthrough, but still. Lazarevich was such a great antagonist in the second game that outdoing him is almost impossible when it comes to creating a bad guy that's the definition of pure evil. He had cunning strategy and was a physical threat all at once. 3 doing it differently, with Marlowe being a relentlessly evil person who needs Talbot to do the dirty work. I think they characterized Marlowe in a way that makes her scenes fun to watch, like how she just slaps 15-year-old Nate across the face when he's stolen what she's after. cementing her right at the start as someone who doesn't have that many lines she won't cross. But then I like this scene where Nate is captured and she's picking at his insecurities like his parents, revealing a little bit about Nate's backstory for the first time. She's effective at all those things, like any good manipulative villain would be. But then you get Talbot, who feels more like a cartoon character in that he just disappears around corners like he's Batman, or takes bullets and shows up 2 seconds later unharmed. And then, as I said earlier, feels the need to run from Nate across rooftops out of nowhere despite having these top secret Black Ops powers that put him one step ahead at all times, whether it feels earned or not. But then you kind of forget about them both for a bit since you play as Nate fighting pirates for an hour and then get trapped in the desert after crashing a plane out of the sky. Now those were Marlowe's men on the plane, but still I'm just saying the villains don't really leave much of an impression at this point in the story. Nate stumbles upon the villains again after days in the desert. But all this does lead to an intense climax. Maybe too intense? Not trying to complain too much, but I just had to make note of this ending action scene in the desert storm outside of Ubar because it was merciless. 3 trucks firing machine guns all at once while you're flanked by snipers and rocket launchers. I died so many times here, but in a completely comedic fashion because it's so over the top with how many bullets and explosions are coming after you. But once you reach Ubar and Nate is drugged again, learning that the hallucinogenic water is why the city was wiped out and why Drake covered it up, is the moment I feel like the game is starting to drag a little bit. Another reason why I would have just cut the pirate level idea, because by the time I've reached the actual ending, I'm a little worn out with the constant firefights, in a way I perhaps wouldn't be if the game was an hour shorter, or just maybe 30 minutes. Cut half of that boat scene or something. The actual ending being a bit weak compared to 2 because Marlowe is killed in a cutscene and then Talbot is taken out in a quick fist fight. A good scene, kind of felt like a playable version of the Krauser QTE fight in Resident Evil 4, and then Sully gets this great line in.
That'll teach you to bring a knife to a gunfight.
But still, with Talbot being seen as so powerful and capable earlier, a fist fight with a knife is a bit anticlimactic. But having said that, Uncharted 3 ends on the note of the world being saved and Nate finally being ready to settle down with Elena after some fatherly advice from Sullivan. Which was an interesting ending when I first played it, if only because it actually could have been the ending of the series had they decided to go that route. But of course, they did continue it with Uncharted 4, which I can talk about later. As it stands, Uncharted 3 was in a tough spot when it released, and I think it still is. Looking back on it with over 10 years of hindsight, I think they set up a goal of outdoing Uncharted 2, and I feel like it was a goal that, in the eyes of the audience, was never going to be easily achieved, at least not on PlayStation 3. People will always remember the first one for how it introduced them to this world, and the second one for its explosive action and gameplay improvements, and then the fourth one for its next generation appeal and next level storytelling. 3 is always going to be the one that comes between all that. Its contributions to the mechanical evolution of the series and its elevation of the storytelling is just harder to appreciate. But going back to it with that hindsight reveals that I think they absolutely achieved what they set out to do here. As a game, I think Uncharted 3 belongs in the same conversation as 2. In some areas it's better, and in some areas it's worse, but it stands tall alongside it when you look at the 2 games on a neutral level. 2 just has the advantage of the wow factor that 3 doesn't. 3 demonstrates more technical expertise and continues doing more of what people already liked. I just think overall, Uncharted 2 is the more cohesive game. It's just a tighter game in the final product, which makes a lot of people gravitate towards it more. But I don't think 3 should be counted out. If it's your favorite of the PS3 trilogy, I would have no reason to counteract it because I get it. It's not a perfect game, and it does have flaws like filler levels I was talking about earlier, but I really dug Uncharted 3 this time around and have a newfound respect for it. Even if the nostalgia of liking 2 so much 10 years ago and that cohesiveness makes me lean towards that one as my favorite of the 3. But that's about all I have for Uncharted 3. I was pleasantly surprised with this one. But before we move on to Uncharted 4, A Thief's End on the PlayStation 4, I want to talk about the often forgotten 2012 installment for the PlayStation Vita, Uncharted Golden Abyss. So that's going to be the next video. Until that time comes, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.